Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, May 2025. It began with rumors, whispers in the corridors of power. On a tense night in late 2024, a group of military dissidents made an ill-fated attempt to unseat Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young, fiery, anti-imperialist leader of Burkina Faso. For many in the West, the coup was expected to be the breaking point of his presidency. Instead, it became a turning point, transforming Traoré from a symbol of defiance to a beacon of African sovereignty. This long-form report delves into the attempted coup's aftermath and the geopolitical consequences that rippled across Africa and Europe. At its heart lies a question: why did efforts to isolate and undermine Traoré backfire, and what does this say about the crumbling influence of the West in the Sahel? On the night of the coup attempt, Ouagadougou braced for uncertainty. Roads were blocked. The capital's air was tense. But by morning, Traoré appeared calm and defiant in military fatigues, addressing the nation not with fear, but with fire. "We will not bend to foreign interests," he declared. "Those who serve the people do not run when shadows dance in the dark." Almost immediately, Burkinabe citizens took to the streets, not in protest, but in defense. Armed with flags, slogans, and courage, they rallied behind the president. In the days that followed, evidence surfaced suggesting the coup attempt may have had external encouragement, if not in funding, then in diplomatic silence. According to leaked intelligence reviewed by Trending News Plus, the South Africa Command, under General Michael Langley, had expressed grave concern over Traoré's deepening ties with Russia and China. In a closed-door NATO session, Langley reportedly warned that Burkina Faso is no longer a partner but a strategic risk. Traoré's decision to expel French forces, nationalize gold resources, and sign defense pacts with Moscow and Beijing had triggered alarm bells in Western capitals. But where the West saw danger, much of Africa saw hope. One of the most telling reactions came from an unlikely source: Denmark. In March 2024, Denmark announced it would close its embassy in Ouagadougou, citing security concerns and deteriorating diplomatic conditions. Many interpreted this as a polite withdrawal under Western pressure. But after the coup attempt failed and Traoré's popularity soared, Denmark quietly paused its closure plans. By early 2025, Danish diplomats resumed discreet talks with Burkina officials, and the embassy, while officially in transitional status, remained operational. A Danish foreign policy advisor, speaking anonymously, told Trending News Plus, "We misread the situation. Traoré is not a passing wave. He's a tide." This diplomatic recalibration highlights a broader trend: the West playbook in Africa is failing. France's colonial shadow no longer frightens. The US soft power is eroding. Even Germany, long a cautious player in the Sahel, is re-evaluating its military deployments and aid structures. Why? Because the ground is shifting beneath them. Cuba's constant in the memory of Sankara. While Denmark wavered, Cuba stood firm. The bond between Havana and Ouagadougou dates back to the era of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary Pan-Africanist who, like Traoré, rejected Western dominance. In 1975, Fidel Castro and Sankara forged a unique alliance: medical missions, educational exchanges, and ideological solidarity. Fast forward to today, and Cuba was among the first nations to condemn the coup attempt and reaffirm support for Traoré. A Cuban envoy visiting Ouagadougou shortly after the coup declared, "We stood with Sankara. We stand with Traoré. Africa must choose its own path." This historical thread matters. While the West often shifts positions based on economic interests and military calculations, African leaders are increasingly valuing long-standing relationships built on mutual respect rather than strategic exploitation. While there was no direct military response from NATO countries, the aftermath of the coup attempt saw a noticeable uptick in diplomatic protocol enforcement, a quiet weapon of retaliation. Burkina officials reported delayed visa processing, suspended trade talks, and withheld aid pending democratic assurances. Western embassies tightened their public statements, framing Traoré as a transitional leader under scrutiny, despite overwhelming local support. An internal EU briefing obtained by Trending News Plus revealed a telling line: engagement must be transactional and conditional. Burkina Faso's drift toward autocracy necessitates a recalibrated carrot-stick approach. But these sticks only fueled Traoré's domestic legitimacy. He framed Western hesitation as proof that Burkina Faso was on the right path. And many Burkinabe agreed. The failure of Western policy in the Sahel is not just about Burkina Faso, it's about a broader continental awakening. From Mali to Niger, governments are kicking out foreign troops, nationalizing resources, and exploring new partnerships. Africa is no longer the passive theater of Cold War-era chess. It's becoming a new center of global strategy. Experts point to a few key reasons. Economic sovereignty. African nations are demanding control over their own resources. Traoré's nationalization of gold mines was praised in many African capitals. Security fatigue. Western military interventions, especially French-led operations, have failed to contain terrorism and have often made it worse. Global multipolarity, with Russia, China, Turkey, and even Iran offering partnerships free of colonial memory, African leaders are hedging their bets. Dr. Layla Abubakar, a Pan-African political scientist, notes, "The West is struggling because it speaks in conditional aid, while the East offers infrastructure and respect. Traoré is not alone, he's the face of a wider shift. Perhaps the most glaring contradiction is the Western obsession with democracy selectively applied. In Burkina Faso, Traoré came to power via a military transition, yes. But so did many leaders once backed by Washington and Paris. In fact, the US has supported coups in countries like Egypt, Libya and Chile when it suited their interests. So when Western officials demand restoration of constitutional order in Burkina Faso, many African observers ask, where was that demand in Libya after NATO's invasion? Where was the outcry when elected African leaders were toppled with Western complicity? It's this double standard that is alienating young Africans and pushing them toward leaders who speak plainly and act boldly, even if outside the Western mold." As the dust settles, the failed coup has paradoxically fortified Ibrahim Traoré's position, not just within Burkina Faso, but across Africa and among non-Western allies. His response to U.S. General Langley's gold reserve accusations, publicly mocking the West's hypocrisy while reaffirming sovereignty, struck a chord. His visits to Moscow and Beijing, once deemed provocative, are now seen as strategic genius. And his insistence on African dignity is reshaping how Europe, especially smaller nations like Denmark, must now approach diplomacy. In the end, what the West tried to frame as instability has become a symbol of resilience. Burkina Faso's stance under Traoré is not just about one nation's defiance, it's about a continent's rebirth. The age of begging is over. The age of bargaining has begun. And perhaps, for the first time since colonial borders were drawn with European pens, African leaders are now writing their own story.